On today's Murder, She Wrote podcast, old murder, new murder, bones at a construction site, then someone else gets killed, and the introduction of Seth Hazlitt and Henry Price. On today's Murder, She Wrote podcast. Hello and welcome to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, where I watch every single episode of the hit 80s/90s show Murder, She Wrote, starring 3-time Academy Award nominee and 5-time Tony Award winner Miss Angela Lansbury. Today I'm going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 2, Joshua Peabody Died Here, possibly. Air date October 6th, 1985. Hello everyone, I apologize for not posting an episode yesterday. I got distracted shopping with my friend and was having so much fun that I forgot and lost track of time, but I'm doing it today. As always, if you are new to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, thank you for listening. I spoil every aspect of the episode there is to spoil. The murderer, why he or she did it, and the suspects and everything in between. So if you've not seen this episode, please go on the app Peacock and watch the episode for free with limited commercial interruption, or get out your DVDs if you own the complete series like I do, or if you have Amazon Prime, you can watch it on there too, I'm told. Unfortunately, if you're following along on Hallmark Channel, they are currently in Season 1, but you can listen to all my Season 1 episodes on my channel whenever you would like to. Because spoilers throughout the rest of this video as we dive into this very interesting episode. In this episode, we get introduced to Seth Hazlitt, played by William Window, who appeared as a different character in the Season 1 finale, one of my favorite finales so far of Murder, She Wrote. And we also get introduced to Henry Price, the realtor in town, which his face and his name look so familiar to me. I know he's appeared in another episode of Murder, She Wrote, possibly in Season 1 as well, but I can't remember exactly what, so we'll find out when I get to the guest stars at the end of the episode. Okay, so we start off this episode at a construction site. They are constructing a high-rise hotel, which no one in Cabot Cove seems to want. There are protesters led by a man named David Marsh, who is the environmentalist of the town. He owns the antique store in town. They're trying to do the construction work, and Amos Tupper, the sheriff, played by Tom Bosley, comes in and is about to get everyone out when someone says, "Wow, come here and look at this." Everyone, of course, wants to go look, and we then find ourselves at Seth Hazlitt's doctor's office. He's apparently been the town doctor for years, and everyone goes to him, and him and Jessica are best friends. She is there because of her back. Apparently, allegedly, because we didn't see it, she installed storm windows in her house and threw her back out in the process of doing it. And Seth and her are talking about that, and she's also having trouble writing her next book, which only gets one... Sorry, that was my phone. Wrong number. Apparently the warranty in my car has expired. Unfortunately, guess what? I don't have a car. I don't drive, like Jessica. I don't drive. And I don't have a bike. I just walk around. So I apologize for that. Anyway, the whole book dilemma only gets mentioned once in this episode and never gets mentioned again. So suddenly Amos Tupper comes in and says, Well, Doc, I'd hate to drag you away from killing off your patients, but you need to bring your medical bag and come down to the construction site of the hotel. There's something you gotta see. Now, I don't understand this comment, because in other episodes, from what I can remember, because I have not seen every single episode of Murder, She Wrote, Seth is always highly regarded as a doctor. I mean, I remember in one episode he even helps Amos with something. And it is weird that he would say this offhand comment. It makes no sense to me at all. But Mrs. Fletcher, Seth, and Sheriff Tupper all arrive back at the construction site, and we finally find out what they've discovered. Bones. and everyone thinks that it's the bones of Joshua Peabody, a war hero from the 1700s that will get frequently mentioned throughout the rest of the show, starting with this episode. We also get introduced to Henry Price, who's the realtor, like I said, whose face is so familiar to me, and I think I've seen him in another episode before this. He has a lot riding on this deal, even going as far as to buying a house because he thought that it was going to be a surefire thing. So he's wanting it to move along, get the bones out of there so they can go. Seth goes down the ladder to go examine the bones, and Miss Fletcher wants to go down too, but he says, "Oh no, woman, you're not going to go down there and hurt your back again." So he hands the skull up to her, and it has a hole in the side of it, where somebody either shot him or hit him with something. So Seth basically says that Joshua Peabody is a myth, a legend that someone made up, and there's been no proof of his existence. Until possibly now. So Mrs. Fletcher, while at the site, reminds Amos that these bones might not be Joshua Peabody's bones. They might be somebody else's bones. They might be recent bones. And so the construction of the hotel must stop until they determine if the bones are from the 1700s or if they're from that day or a couple years before that or whatever. So construction has been shut down. Mr. Price is angry and says when Mr. Whitley hears about this, he's going to come down and he's not going to be happy. But the sheriff does not care. He basically says, as much. They go back to Seth's office and examine the bones, and they have found a gun that was issued in the 1700s, making Sheriff Tupper firmly believe that this is, in fact, Joshua Peabody's bones. Mrs. Fletcher calls David Marsh, who owns the antique store in town, and she gives him the names and letters off of that, and he confirms it's from the 1700s. But Seth is still not convinced. Meanwhile, Henry Price is still there too, and he demands that the sheriff get things done and allow him to continue construction. Mr. Kolowski, the head of construction for the hotel, says that the equipment is faulty and that he can't really do anything until the equipment is fixed or they get better equipment. So it seems like there's trouble all around. So Sheriff Tupper tells Mr. Pierce that that construction will not continue until they solve whoever the bones is. Meanwhile, Jessica goes. Meanwhile, at Hill House, Mr. Kurowski, Mr. Pierce are talking to Mr. Whitley, who has come into town, and we then get introduced to Dell Scott, played by Meg Foster. She is a reporter who has come to town to report on the findings of the remains of Joshua Peabody. Later that same day, Mrs. Fletcher is riding her bike, and she stops her in the middle of the street to ask her if she would do a quote about the findings at the construction site. Mrs. Fletcher politely declines and says that she does not wish to be on camera to say anything. Meanwhile, Mr. Whitley talks to his partner, Arthur Griswell, telling him that the construction needs to happen and he needs to go to court and get an injunction so that they can continue the construction. He does this, and construction is resumed. But meanwhile, back at Sheriff Tupper's office, a random couple comes in and says that they think that the bones belong to a person who used to do war reenactments. Apparently the War of Boston or something? I'm not sure exactly what war they're referencing, because as far as I know, there was the War of 1812, there was the Boston Tea Party, so maybe that war. And they think that it's his bones. Suddenly, a prim and proper guy comes in, and he tells Amos that he's part of the Joshua Peabody Foundation or something, and has come to take the remains, the bones. Sheriff Tupper tells him that they have not determined whose bones they are. And he gets a call, and there's more trouble at the construction site. They have gotten permission to continue building, but the protests have continued. Sheriff Tupper shows up, Mrs. Fletcher's there, I don't know how she got there. And that prim and proper gentleman, whose name I don't even know, he introduces himself, but he's not important to the story, because after this part, he does not show up ever again. He is shown leaning up against a dump truck with his cane and his hat in the dirt, and says that he has an injunction that until the site is declared non-historical and that the remains of Joshua Peabody were not actually there, construction has to be stalled. And we never see this guy again. Even though, this is apparently important and they go to the trouble of introducing this guy, I just don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. Also, your visual aid is the bones that they found in the construction site. I figured that would be the perfect visual aid for this episode. So construction is shut down again, and later that night, Seth and Mrs. Fletcher are having dinner together. Salad, biscuits, something that may or may not have basil in it. He doesn't really say what it is. And as they're sitting there, talking about Joshua Peabody, Seth presents some evidence where there's some paper where it says the uniform was issued in the 1700s. Mrs. Fletcher says, see, so it's possible, it could be Joshua Peabody, and Seth says, no, I do not think so. So, he then goes on the counter and picks up a cake and says, I made your favorite 7-layer cake. And Mrs. Fletcher goes, layers, layers, that's right, Seth. The next morning, she arouses Amos out of bed, and they go to the construction site because she wants to dig underneath where they found the bones. Maybe they'll find some sort of something from the 1700s other than the gun they apparently found. Maybe they'll find out if the bones are from the 1700s or if they're not from the 1700s. Sheriff Tupper is very tired and does not want to be there, but goes along with it anyway. When they go down to the construction site, which apparently they have done a path to where you don't have to climb down a ladder, there's now just a path where you can walk down into the hole where they found the bones. They lift up the tarp and they find Mr. Whitley's body in the chalk outline that Amos had put where they found the bones. So now we have a person possibly dead from the 1700s or not, and now a real person. And Amos says, Sheriff Tupper says, wow, we have quite the collection. We're taking up a collection, aren't we? So Miss Scott ends up showing up, and she wants to interview Mrs. Fletcher again about the events that had just conspired there. And unfortunately, Mrs. Fletcher says no, but Sheriff Tupper keeps going, and she decides to interview him. And as she's interviewing him, Mrs. Fletcher goes looking around the site trying to find different tracks. She finds some blood on a wheelbarrow. But other than that, it apparently rained that last night, the previous night, and the rain has washed away all footprints and all evidence of everything in between. So, there's no evidence of how he got there, but Mrs. Fletcher draws a map on a chalkboard trying to figure out why the killer put him in that spot. Why not just kill him where he stood, where the body fell, because she believes he was killed by the trailer. She then goes back to the construction site to sneak around, where she runs into Mr. Kapowski. Mr. Kapowski has a cut on his hand, and he tells her that he needs to do his job and to go back and to go away. Even though construction's been shut down, I don't know exactly what his job is at this point. But Mrs. Fletcher, seeing the cut on his hand, thinks that he is the killer. Meanwhile, as she's riding her bike through town, she notices that David's son and Price's son are fighting in the middle of the street. She parks her bike across the street, runs over to them, and breaks up the fight. Oh, and by the way, the man that comes with the Joshua Peabody Society, or whatever the hell it is named Ellsworth Bunham. I don't know. Like I said, his whole, it doesn't make any sense why he was thrown in there. But anyway, she breaks up the fight. Mr. Pierce comes out. David and his wife, Maddie, come out of their antique store. And then we get introduced to a new character named FBI agent Fred Keller, who believes that Mr. David Marsh is actually Daniel Martin, a man who used to protest the Vietnam War and apparently blew up the Capitol building, and is not who he says he is. Mr. Keller is there to arrest him because he saw him on the news when Mrs. Scott filmed him when he was protesting. But Sheriff Tupper just so happens to be driving by and comes up and asks what's going on. And Mr. Pierce apparently knows all about Daniel Martin and says, "Oh wow, some things never change. Here you are protesting now." Sheriff Tupper says that he's there to arrest David for the murder of Mr. Whitley, because Mr. Whitley was apparently meeting David at the construction site. He claims that he went for a walk and ended up at the construction site, but he didn't see Mr. Whitley there. Sheriff Tupper decides to arrest him anyway, taking him away from Mr. Keller. Mr. Keller goes to Seth's office and demands that Seth look at the medical records for Daniel Martin and compare them to David Marsh. Seth looks at them briefly, but as Mr. Keller begins mouthing off, saying that he doesn't like loose ends and that he's taken sick leave and that he knows for a fact that David and Daniel are one and the same, Seth says, "Nope, I'm not helping you," and he leaves. Jessica then says to Seth that she believes wholeheartedly that David did not blow up a Capitol building and also did not kill Mr. Whitley. She's riding her bike again, and she comes across Mr. Kapowski, who has taken his RV and set it up on a cliff overlooking the ocean, which is beautiful. She claims that that's her favorite spot in town. Apparently, Mr. Kapowski is not doing his job anymore because it's been shut down completely, I guess. She has brought some Neosporin for his cut on his hand, and as she bandages it up for him and puts the Neosporin on it, the two of them begin talking, and he talks about how Mr. Whitley was not a very liked guy. He was hated amongst everyone, and I'm sorry, tongue-tied there. And he's not surprised that he is dead because a lot of people wanted him dead. Apparently he was known for cutting corners with faulty construction equipment, just like he did at the construction of the high-rise hotel. Apparently there was a man that fell 34 stories, and a bunch of beams fell on top of him as well, because they were trying to lift the beams up, and the beams fell on top of him, and he died as a result. And a couple other terrible accidents happened. One of his friends died, but he claims, I didn't kill him. But it doesn't surprise me that someone did. Meanwhile, back at the sheriff's station, Mrs. Fletcher goes to see David, who admits that yes, he did protest the Vietnam War, but when things got to be too much, he fled because him and his gang were not for violence. So he knew for a fact that he did not bomb the Capitol building. But he does admit that he was there where it happened, I think in Washington. I don't know if it was in Washington or somewhere else. They don't really go into detail about that. Just like how they introduced this one dude and he never, Ellsworth, and never shows up again. So Mrs. Fletcher's in Sheriff Tupper's office trying to figure out why the killer would put Mr. Whitley where they found the bones. It must be some sort of symbolic gesture. And Seth says, well, we'll never know. And they also realize that Arthur Griswold is gone, who was Mr. Whitley's partner, but he never shows back up in the episode at all. Apparently he's taken a lot of money, and he took Mr. Whitley's money before he left town, but that never gets resolved. So as they're sitting there talking, Sheriff Tupper says, David, Daniel, the names are so similar. And Mrs. Fletcher says, oh, Amos, thank you. I can always count on you to tell me something, and she leaves. She goes to the library to look up some articles, and then she calls Miss Scott. And she tells Miss Scott that she wants to make a statement. They go to the construction site, and Mrs. Fletcher says that she's very happy that the hotel will not be constructed. Unfortunately, she is sad that it had to come at the expense of Mr. Whitley's death. She then starts talking about how Mr. Whitley was not a very liked person, and that several men had died due to his faulty equipment, including her brother. Apparently, the man that fell 34 stories and had beams fall on top of him was Mrs. Dana Scott's brother, but she changed her name from Della to Dell, something like that. At first she denies it, but Mrs. Fletcher points out a very interesting detail that I missed. When Miss Scott interviewed Sheriff Tupper, she said, how did you feel when you pulled up the blue tarp and found Mr. Whitley's body? She wouldn't have known that if she didn't see the tarp, because the tarp was gone by the time she got there. So she killed Mr. Whitley because he killed her brother, and every time that she had him, he would bribe people and get away with it. So, since they happened to be in the same town, she decided to kill him and put his body in where they found the bones. The bones actually turn out to be the real Daniel Martin, because Mrs. Fletcher is able to prove that David Marsh was actually already in Cabot Cove when the bombing took place. Because apparently he saved some people in a house fire because he was there. And Mr. Daniel Martin actually so happened to come to Cabot Cove and participated about 13 years before this episode in the war reenactments. Apparently he was running into the woods where the construction site was to be, where the hotel was to be constructed, and hit his head or something and died there, and no one went to go looking for him because I guess they forgot about him. So the remains are not Joshua Peabody, but he will be brought up in frequent episodes. So David gets to stay home, Mr. Keller is disappointed but is happy, and all is well in Cabot Cove. The end! Really great episodes, some fun twists and turns. Let's go over the guest stars. The only one I recognized was Meg Foster, although Mr. Keller looked familiar to me, but let's see John Austen, who played Harry Price, if he appeared in another episode of Murder, She Wrote before this. He was in The Frighteners, because I remember saying this on an episode before, and he's still alive and still acting. His last known credit is Justice League action TV series voice work. And he was in The Addams Family and The Nanny. And did a lot of voice work. Okay, yes, now I know he did appear in another episode of Murder, She Wrote in Season 1. Hooray for Homicide. He played the guy that really wanted the movie to be made, and he tried to replace the button. I totally get it now. And he'll appear in a handful of other episodes playing the role of Henry Price. So he shares a thing in common with William Window. It's playing a different character before landing on the show. Good for him. Alright. Now let's look at Chuck Connors, who played Mr. FBI agent Fred Keller. He looked familiar to me. He died in 1992 at the age of 71. He is known for Old Yeller. Oh yeah, Old Yeller, I love that. Move Over, Darling, and Flipper. His last known credit was from 2001. How's that possible if he died in 1992? That doesn't make any sense. He's known for Fast Backwards, a short. That was his last credit. And his other credit from 2001 is A Man Who Fell from the Sky as the narrator. I guess maybe he completed that before his death and they didn't release it until 2001. It's possible. I don't know. He was in The Gambler Returns, Luck of the Draw with Kenny Rogers. And he will appear in another episode of Murder, She Wrote. So we'll go over his credentials when we get to that episode. Awesome career, Mr. Connors. Our murder victim was played by John Erickson, Mr. Whitley. He died last year at the age of 93. He is known for Bedknobs and Broomsticks. That is one of Angela Lansbury's known films that she did for Disney. Bad Day at Black Rock, The Money Jungle, and Shirley Temple's Storybook Show. His last known credit is Crash, a TV series where he played a father of a doctor? I don't know. This is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He guest starred on Fantasy Island, Airwolf, the original A-Team, the original Knight Rider, the original Chips, The Magical World of Disney, The Harvey Boys, Nancy Drew Mysteries, Policewoman, Police Story. The Wild World of Mystery, Marcus Welby, MD, Gunsmoke, Bonanza. So he had quite an impressive career. Good for you, Mr. Erickson. Our killer was played by Meg Foster, whom I think I recognized as being in The Stepfather, or The Stepfather 2, and several other things. She's known for Masters of the Universe, They Live, The Lords of Salem, and 31. She's still acting to this day. Her last known, she's doing something called Haunted 333 post-production, Hellblazers post-production, S2K completed. Her last completed credit is There's No Such Thing as Vampires. She was on Pretty Little Liars. I remember that. The spinoff Ravenswood, terrible show. Xenon, Warrior Princess, Hercules, Sliders, Star Trek Deep Sea Nine. She'll be in another episode of Murder, She Wrote, so we'll go over more of her credentials then when we see her again. But she's a terrific actress. She was in The Stepfather Part 2, I remember now. David Marsh was played by Michael Straczyn, or Straczyn, he was an actor. He died in 2011 at the age of 70. He is known for They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, The Sweet Ride, On the Road, and Deep in the City. His last known credit is the movie On the Road as an Irish Catholic priest. Okay. He appeared in The Christmas Choir with Rita Perlman on Hallmark Channel. He guest starred on The Outer Limits, Poltergeist, The Legacy, Star Trek Deep Sea Nine, the Ray Bradbury Theater, and he will appear in another episode of Murder, She Wrote, so we'll go over more of his credits when we get to that. When we get to the next episode. But he was really good in this episode. The partner that never comes back, Arthur Griswold, was played by David Schroeder. I'm sure I'm not saying that right. He's known for the original Odd Couple, Blue Thunder, The $6 Million Man, and The Stone Killer. He's still alive, and his last known credit is another episode of Murder, She Wrote, aside from this one. So we'll just, when we get to him again, I'll go over his credits from there. The head of construction, Mr. Kapowski, was played by Ken Shepard. He died in 2018 at the age of 85. He's known for Annie, really, because I did not recognize him whatsoever from... He played Weasel? Like, okay. The Abnormal Stain, Black Roses, and The $6 Million Man. His last known credit is from 2018 Happy the Angry Polar Bear. As the voice of that, he was in Teacher's Pet, theatrical release movie. Recess, School's Out, guest starred on Diagnosis Murder, and also this will not be his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He will appear in several others, so I will tell you more of his credits when we get to other episodes with him. But he was really good in this episode. And our mysteriously weird character, Ellsworth Bunham, was played by Robin Bleach. He died in 1991 at the age of 43. He's known for Simon & Simon, Murder, She Wrote, Fast Forward, and Satan's Princess. His last known credit is a TV movie called Coppersmith. He guest starred on Columbo, Designing Women, and this will not be his only episode. Oh, he appeared as the maitre d' in Birds of a Feather, and he will appear in a handful of other episodes as well. Interesting. We'll get to more of his credits later. And last but certainly not least, Deborah White played the role of David's wife. And we'll see what she's known for. She's still alive. She is known for Mallrats, St. Elsewhere, The Waltons, and a movie called 10. She's still alive and she's still acting. Her last known credit is The Americans. She guest starred on the original Law and Order, Mr. Belvedere, Growing Pains, Alf, Cadney and Lacey, Days of Our Lives. This is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. Hotel, St. Elsewhere, Dallas Cowboy Cheerleaders, Laverne and Shirley, Barnaby Jones. So she's had quite the impressive career. You go, Miss White, you go. Alright. That is all of our guest stars in this episode. This was a really great episode. I thoroughly enjoyed it. There was a lot of twists and turns. A lot of new characters were introduced, like Seth and Henry Price, which apparently Seth will be in every season from now on until the end. Henry Price, I don't know how many episodes he actually appears in. But I can't wait to see what happens next. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope everyone has a very good day. You wear your mask, wash your hands, and happy crime solving, and I'll see you in the next one.